Hello, Popcorn Junkie on his own once again, reviewing the second spiritual religious film in a week. It's called Apostasy. That word immediately would put most people off seeing this film, I think. It made me and Nadia Sawalha, and once again this was a very hard sell to the family. Apostasy means the renunciation of a religious belief, so hot on the heels of Ethan Hawke in First Reformed, check out our review. This is another spiritually orientated movie, very British, and it's a film about a family that's living within the confines of the Jehovah's Witness religion. The mum is a woman called Ivanna and her two daughters, her oldest daughter Luisa and her youngest daughter Alex. We pick up the story, and I think it's purposely ambiguous as to what's quite going on, but the youngest daughter is at a doctor's and she's kind of explaining how she received a blood transfusion when she was a child, and it's about how in the Jehovah's Witness religion you're not allowed to have blood transfusions. It's considered wrong. By all accounts, statistics show that many people die because due to their faith, they refuse blood transfusions. Now, I've always long been fascinated by Jehovah's Witnesses, and I'm sure that most people's understanding or experience of them is when they knock on your front door, they're very sort of amenable and agreeable, gently persuasive or gently pressing, and you really politely say, give us the leaflet, and they head off. But I've always wondered, what drives this faith? What lies underneath this faith? We often hear people talk about it or denounce it, but what does it actually mean? And I think this film, if nothing else, it might not be quite to your liking in terms of pace. It's a very bleak film. It's a very slow film. It's again like First Reformed. It's a very meditative film. But I think it's a very important film because it's directed by a chap called, and I have to check his surname, Dan Kokotajlo, who himself was a Jehovah's Witness, and I presume has gone through the process of apostasy, where he's essentially renounced or turned his back on it. And so it was important to him that he made a film that was an honest and fair representation. He really wasn't interested in characterizing Jehovah's Witnesses as mad or bad. He just wanted to present it almost flatly in its objectivity. It's a strange film. It's a very emotional film, and yet when you look at it, it's a very emotionless film, insofar as it's shot in a very bleak palette of colours. Invariably, it's natural light. Where there's any artificial light, it's the strip lights where they have their congregations. The shots are very well composed. They're incredibly symmetrical. They invariably revolve around incredibly suburban, very plain, often up against brick walls, suburban exteriors, civic buildings, and yet simmering away at the heart of this is this family. Anyway, the mum Ivanna, who is played absolutely phenomenally by Siobhan Finneran, and we'll all know her from the BBC series Happy Valley. She's bought into this faith. She's committed her life to this faith, hook, line and sinker. You could judge her for being mean to her younger children, who are clearly, they're younger and they're facing the facts that perhaps they're not as accepted within society. And yet at the same time, there's nothing malicious in what the mother's doing. It is her faith, it is her belief. She loves her children, it's just not a love that we, watching it, would necessarily fully understand. Alex, the youngest daughter, starts the film talking about a blood transfusion she had when she was younger, and in a way this marks her from the get-go. She's marked as essentially impure, she's marked as essentially having been tampered with. She's already, in a sense, failed to successfully meet the obligations of her faith. So the family, in a sense, is marked out. And yet Alex, the youngest, is absolutely committed to the faith. She essentially wants the right to decide her own fate because she has an anemic condition, whether if she ever needed a blood transfusion again, she'd make the decision to essentially sacrifice herself. A shout out has to go immediately to the girl who plays Alex, Molly Wright. A remarkable performance. I've not seen her anywhere else. I don't know if this is her first sort of major part, but her older sister Luisa is played by Sasha Parkinson, who is quite remarkable. And the first sense that perhaps as a family they sit outside of normal living, if you like. She's with Luisa, the older sister's college friends, and she realizes, Alex, the younger sister, that her older sister hasn't actually told her friends that she's in a Jehovah's Witness. And so suddenly this sort of unraveling occurs. You see these scenes where gradually the community of the church when they go to congregation, etc., lots of mutterings around the idea that the older sister has fornicated, and gradually she is disestablished. I can't remember what the word is. There's a funny term that they use for it, where she's essentially ostracized from the community. So we are in a situation where the older daughter, Luisa, is pregnant. She's forced to leave home, or feels she has to leave home. The mother is not talking to her and is trying to observe the doctrine of her faith. And the younger sister, because she knows no better, is likewise trying to hold her at arm's length. Now, again, what they managed to pull off here, which is quite remarkable, is they do this and you're frustrated as hell as a viewer, and especially as a non-believer, because you're thinking, put your arms around her, how can you push her out at a time like this? And yet at the same time, you can see that they are simply observing their faith. They're not doing it in a malicious way. It manages to present an incredibly honest portrayal of a faith that, to us non-believers, if you like, in the outside world, you know, rather than just being able to dismiss it, it allows you to walk in someone else's shoes. That phrase, until you've walked in someone else's shoes, don't be a judge. So this film's very successful at that. This is a spoiler review, so if you haven't seen the film, I would stop watching this review now. But there's a moment in the middle of the film that was so shocking, but only shocking in its ordinariness. And that, of course, is the departure of the younger daughter due to her not allowing herself to have a blood transfusion. And what was most shocking about this was that the mum, when she comes out of the hospital and we know that she's gone in because she's ill, I thought, well, she was in a coma or she was recovering or that they've had to treat her or something, because the mother looks so unemotional about this. She walks around in front of a brick wall, she goes home, she makes a cup of tea, she goes to work. Now, of course, no one's going to be unaffected by this, and yet because the faith suggests that when you die, a greater thing's going to happen, you're all going to be reunited, it's all going to be brilliant on the other side, I was shocked and horrified to discover, obviously 2 scenes further along, we're at a funeral. That for me was almost the most shocking moment I've seen in a film without it being shocking. I mean, at times this film drives you absolutely nuts. The formality, the lack of emotion, the way in which you're screaming out for the mum to have some sort of facial or physical or just genuine emotional response to what's going on with her children. You sort of think, well, you know, where's your humanity? And it does make you consider issues around faith and brainwashing, the degree to which, if you're born into something and you're indoctrinated in a belief system, how do you have any scope to be able to question it, query it, or whatever? Luisa has the baby and she tries to seek some kind of re-entry back into the faith. There is one moment though, of course, where mum finally breaks down and starts to cry. And what I think is very clever about this, there has been this building, simmering emotional intensity across the film, controlled and managed, if you like, by net curtains and very austere interiors and settings. There's no television, there's no music. Even the chapel where the Jehovah's Witnesses go to pray is a incredibly compact, civic-looking, nondescript building alongside 2 really fast-moving dual carriageways, which gives you this sense of how the Jehovah's Witnesses are sitting still and yet the rest of the world sort of racing past behind them. The camera work is absolutely stunning. It's incredibly contemplative, lots of close-ups. A little bit like First Reformed, very few camera moves, very measured, simmering. I must admit, I wanted to kind of grab the daughters and hold them and hug them. I wanted to grab the mum and throw her out the window and then hug her. I wanted to, now, the men in this film, it once again proves that this faith system, controlled entirely by men in suits dictating who is allowed in, who is not allowed, who's allowed out, who's allowed to talk to who. And so we have the end part of the film is this managing and constriction and tightening of Ivanna's relationship with her eldest daughter, where they're saying, well, we'll try and let her back in, but she has to pass these tests, she has to pass these interviews. And of course, Luisa is a strong personality and she just can't do it. So we have this remarkable end to the film where you think there's going to be this reunion between Mum and Luisa, and big spoiler alert coming here, but she tries to kidnap Luisa's daughter. It was kind of doomed from the beginning, but what it symbolized and what it was very clever at showing was just the sad confusion and isolation and desire to just hold her faith together and somehow her family together. And of course the final shot, which is just the most heartbreaking of all, is a final shot of Siobhan Finneran's character standing in a shopping mall on her own. It's funny, I thought after this film I would be less tolerant of Jehovah's Witnesses, and in a sense I am, but if you view them as slightly victims to a faith, this film, made by an ex-Jehovah's Witness, is a real eye-opener. As I say, it comes in at 90 minutes, so it's not a long watch. It's challengingly slow. It's challengingly meditative again. And yet its build-up is quite remarkable. I think Siobhan Finneran deserves a BAFTA nomination for this. And I think Sasha Parkinson, who we saw briefly in My Mad Fat Diary on, I think, Channel 4, is a supremely brilliant actress, and her performance in this is just quite something else. Watch it for that. If you love good turns by British female actresses, this is the film for you.